Welcome to Around the Fire, a space for conversations to nurture hearts and build lives following Jesus. We love to think more deeply about big ideas and how to apply them.
You're very welcome. That was Sarah. My name is Johnny. We have the privilege of leading in community at Elam Life Church in Birmingham in the UK.
Yes, we do.
We do. And we are having conversations as practitioners, as leaders in our community, whatever that means and looks like. Who knows at this point. But in 2025, our kind of big theme in community has been walking well.
Yeah.
And as part of that, we have been thinking about how we love God, ourselves, and others. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that today. Mm-hmm. Let me do some of the logistics, and then we will get into what we're talking about today.
Right.
If you have a question, a thought, an awareness, a request to be on the podcast, you can drop us an email.
Yeah, we'd genuinely love that.
Yeah, thanks. podcast@elamlifechurch.co.uk. And that would be brilliant. We're really, really looking forward to how we can connect with some more people in some more ways. So please do that. Thank you so much. So then walking well. Mm-hmm. Do you want me to do this intro?
Oh, no, I can do it.
Okay, thanks.
That's fine. Sorry, I didn't realise that was
right.
your, I'm handing the baton.
Well, those intros get too long. And I'm like, well, just get on with it.
Yeah. So we're thinking about, encouraging each other as we are being disciples, making disciples, serving the city. But we've particularly felt drawn to the Sermon on the Mount a lot this year. So looking at the words of Jesus and the ways of Jesus through this huge chunk of teaching and encouragement and invitation and exhortation and Jesus sort of setting the tone of this is the kingdom I've come to establish. This is who I am. This is what it looks like to follow me. This is the invitation. It was like this broad and wide. There was crowds of people hearing this teaching while he was on earth and saying, hey, do you want to be a part of this? And so in this invitation that we felt this year of walking well with Jesus, with others, and towards others in love, what does that look like? And so over the last few weeks, we've been back in the Sermon on the Mount in our sort of Sunday gathered spaces, in our community. And so we're going to have a conversation in this episode and the next one, just around two pieces of Jesus's teaching on things that might feel at first glance a little bit provocative or confronting, or that feels a bit impossible. Like, how on earth am I supposed to live like that? Which I think is sort of kind of the point, that the way of Jesus is just so not the way of other cultures or contexts or ideas, and that actually we need Jesus and we need the Spirit and we need each other to be able to get anywhere near working this stuff out and living this in the reality of our everyday lives. And so I just kind of want to set that tone that as we read it, you might be like, this feels hard. This feels like I might not be able to live this way. I want to encourage us that this is an invitation from God for us to follow his ways and follow his example and to work this out. It can be, we had a conversation a little while ago, it can be in our world, it can be really easy to move away from some of these difficult things because we can just perhaps find other places and spaces. And so, just this invitation really. Because this is the kingdom. This is who Jesus is. This is how he lived. This is what we get to be a part of. So we're going to read from Matthew 5, 38 to 42. So let me just read that for us. And it's entitled, Jesus teaching eye for eye. And whether you've encountered the Bible or not, you might have heard some of these ideas or some of these phrases in different ways. You've heard that it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. Okay.
Go on then.
How do we do that?
What do you want to do about that? Really, really huge things. I'm aware that we have talked about these verses before, maybe 2 or 3 times in the podcast, for lots of reasons, and we will again. It's not.
Yes, this is a lifetime's worth of working this out, walking well, navigating it. Come on.
Which is sort of the invitation that we are encouraging people to think about, that the way that we engage with these is in part going to determine how how realistic and achievable we feel living like this is. And it just feels, for lots of reasons, like it would be worth all of our time to come back again to look at what we receive directly from Jesus around some of these things. By some of these things, we mean how to conduct ourselves as humans while we are on the face of the earth.
Yeah, like what does it look like to be a human being and a follower of Jesus? And Jesus in this part is talking about revenge. And saying, hey, there's a way to navigate. There's a way, to use our language this year, to walk well in love. Like there's a way to be in the world, and then sort of sets up this, I guess, this invitation, this perspective that must have been quite radical for those hearing it then. And I think still feels quite radical now. And that's part of the reason that we keep coming back to it, because like I know that I don't always look like Jesus in this way and in these areas. So, yeah. Do
you want to do a bit of the "you have heard it said" piece of the puzzle? Because we made the point to the room before recording today. If you're not familiar with the story or the reference, then it can be a little bit like, what, on the way there? Like, what do you mean? Do you want to do a little bit of that?
I think so, because there's a run of these in Matthew 5. So, like, we're not going to look at all of them. We're just looking at 2 in this one and the next episode.
Yep.
But he uses this phrase. Different translations do it slightly differently, but, like, you've heard it said. And so what he means by that is, you've heard it said in the law. And so the law, oh gosh, like we don't have time to go into like what the law is, but like the law that God set for his people, for generations of people who followed him, was for human flourishing and to build communities of justice and to build communities that would reflect God really, really well. But they were never the end goal. So they were there to set that up and to set up community and to have these like guardrails or boundaries on how to live and how to kind of live in a society well, how to flourish well. But Jesus, when he's talking like this, is saying, look, you've heard that the law says, and then there's been generations of this tradition of rabbis, Jewish leaders and teachers trying to interpret the law, trying to say, you know, and that's what people do with the law. Like even today, like you go into any courtroom and this is what would happen. People trying to interpret it and understand it and apply it for their context. And so for years and years and years, people have been going, well, I understand the law to mean this. And groups of followers would gather around and go, oh, we agree with your interpretation of the law there. Or another one would say it slightly differently. And so really Jesus is like tapping into this this tradition, this idea of those who are apprenticed or disciples to a rabbi, to a teacher, are saying, how do we live? Like, what do you think about that part of the law? Or what's your perspective on it? Which bit are we highlighting and not? And Jesus is taking it this huge step further. And he's saying, look, you've heard that it said, but now I'm here to fulfill that. Now I'm here to give you this kingdom, like, expansion of what it is. And so he quotes, you have heard it said, but I say, to say, look, you've heard that the law says this. You've heard that there's these kind of boundaries. And it was originally, in this context, it was meant to limit revenge and promote justice, right? That the revenge or the punishment was proportional to the offense committed. Now, I don't know if I've ever shared this on the podcast before, and if I have, I'm sorry. But when I was in school, we had a teacher come in and a supply teacher, and I was Chatty Cathy, shocker, and just he didn't particularly respond well to my vibes. And so he one day gave me some lines to write out that the extent of the punishment is directly proportional to the offence committed. I had to write it out hundreds of times, and I brought it back in the next day and he just ripped it up and put it in the bin. So I understand proportional stuff. And the law was that. It was to give you this kind of like, this boundary line. And Jesus is like, well, rather than, hey, look, what about, can we go up to this point? Can we kind of interpret it in this way? He's like, what if instead of revenge we did no harm? Like, what if instead of just limiting a retribution or retaliation, we went a step further and we looked to do good to someone else? And I think by that he sort of set in this this is what good is. This is what love looks like. This is the kingdom. This is the community that I'm building and I want you to be a part of. And it goes beyond these sort of like letter of the law moments or legal fairness, I think, to this like courageous, non-violent resistance is kind of how I've been thinking about it. But maybe you need to kind of understand some of the sketches and the ideas, because on first pass, you can go, oh, is Jesus just heard something down the pub and now he's telling us to let someone slap me across the face? And so to then go underneath it and go, okay, God, actually, what are you saying and what does this look like? So I think part of it is Jesus going, hey, this is a new way to be human. And I've come to kind of set that in motion. And do you want to be a part of it? So I think that if you've heard it said, but I say to you, I think it's helpful to just understand in that whole run of them, and that he's going to use like metaphor and hyperbole and stories to help us understand.
Really good. I'm pondering.
You have got your pondering face on.
I have, sorry, everyone.
And you even did like the little thing of the beard. I was
cliche,
like, come on.
Sorry, everyone. I think I'm trying to get this into a sentence and for it not to consume 3/4 of the episode. So as God steps into flesh and blood and inherits a time and a culture and a place, part of what was normative and known was the law of retribution. And part of what has kept a lid on people not killing each other for, minor personal offences. Okay, so let's work this as a system. Let's deal with proportional retribution as a way to deal with each other. And everybody's gone, in the absence of anything else, that seems the least worst option of a way to keep society moving, as a way to keep communities functioning, as a way to, we all know somebody who's likely to disproportionately kick off about something, so let's give ourselves some community guardrails to go, hey, no, that's outside of what we've all agreed of what our society is going to look like.
We've signed up to this,
We've signed up to this. There is mutual agreement that this is probably the least worst way to organise each other. Then the creator of all things, with all authority and every possible claim on any sort of retribution for actions that are out of pocket in community, arrives and into a cultural moment where there is precedence for like for like retaliation, with all authority to say, no, I'm gonna take a little bit more than, because that's what I deserve and that's what's right and that's what's fair. Instead shows us another facet of grace and says, no, we're not even gonna fight with it.
Yeah.
We're not even doing proportional retribution. We're not even doing what was considered fair and what was broken.
Yeah.
We're not even doing that.
Yeah.
And that's going to have deep consequences for your society, for your way of being. In that you're going to have to prepare to be insulted, because that's what some of these pictures are of, right? Of being insulted. And we're going to stop this self-perpetuating cycle of responding to an insult with an insult. Yeah. Somebody's going to be big enough to receive an insult and not retaliate, and doubles down on it, literally. Says you might be insulted twice, and you're not going to, all of the things that socially might be acceptable and within your rights to do, and this is stepping on the toes of something that we'll see how we navigate through it. But when you say yes to Jesus, you vacate your rights.
Yeah, I was thinking about this in all of the Sermon on the Mount, actually, all of this like collected wisdom of Jesus that is presented to us in the Gospels, and this idea of what I deserve, what I'm entitled to, and well, it isn't fair. and I've been wrestling with it, because I'm like, mercy and grace isn't fair. Like it isn't. And we often, and we're getting in deep straight away with this, but like, I think we often want to receive grace and mercy when we're not as readily willing to extend it to others. And so I think it is also it points to who Jesus is in this, right? It's N.T. Wright says, like, Jesus' teaching isn't just good advice, it's good news, starting a new way of being human so that all who follow him can discover it. And so it's not that Jesus is separate from this either, because he's having this lived experience, this embodied experience, he's knowing what it is to not have to choose retribution or retaliation, or, you know, and people will let him down, and they'll do terrible things, and they'll say awful things, and they'll question him, and they'll challenge him, and ultimately, you know, he will give his life for something he hasn't done and doesn't deserve. And so understanding that, I think, has to be one of the starting places for what does it look like to follow Jesus, to understand that actually everything that I am, all that I do is now under the authority of Jesus. Like he sets the tone of my life, and we talk often about being centered on Jesus. Like he's the one that kind of sets that. And so my rights, and I'm aware that we live in a world where people can be really misused and abused. And so I'm not saying it in that way, but like if he's the one I'm choosing to apprentice, to become like, to imitate, then he gets the say.
So yes.
But it's really hard, because
Very
that's
hard.
not naturally human to us. That's not naturally, our human nature isn't naturally that. And we live in a context and a culture. Everybody lives in a context and a culture where often that isn't highlighted or encouraged or seen as a good thing sometimes, even, you know, to say, I will choose the way of Jesus. And so often the way of Jesus looks like whatever Jesus says.
Yeah, and the acknowledgement that you no longer have rights as an individual is to your advantage when you're in community with other people who also live like that.
Yeah.
You are the beneficiary of that.
Yeah.
So ironically, you vacate your individual rights, but you end up with greater privilege and positions of favor as a consequence of living in community with other people who equally are saying, do you know what? We need a different guideline for how we respond to injustice and oppression and violence and misuse of other people. Can we agree that we're going to use Jesus as our metric for how we do that? And when we live in community with others who say, yep, that's the metric, this is maybe leaning too heavily on some of my own personal politics, but like some of the, I want to read it. You've heard the law, and I'm not in the same translation as you are, not on purpose. It's just the one that's easiest for me to get to right now. You have heard the law say that the punishment must match the injury, an eye for an eye and tooth for tooth. Say, do not resist an evil person. And if one slaps you on the cheek, offer the other cheek. Also, if you're sued in court and your shirt is taken from you, give your coat too. That, yes, there is the practical parts of that, but there, to me, is also this understanding of like, no. We're not looking to a system established by those things for a different answer. It will only be able to give us the answers that we know it's capable of giving us. And so if you've been insulted and you pursue legal proceedings, you're only capable of getting like for like out of that system.
Yeah.
And so we are acknowledging that we're not governed or ruled or under the authority of that system, because it has no ability to produce anything other than what it already has, what we know it has the ability to produce. Yeah. So then by choosing to come under the authority of Jesus, our expectations are that the end results are different.
Yeah.
They result in human flourishing, it results in life, it results in forgiveness, it results in inclusion, it results in justice, it results in, and so by vacating what is, what feels on earth like rightfully mine to claim, we're just putting it in its place compared to all time and going, oh no, I want to be a part of the way of Jesus forever, which means, vacating what could be mine in this temporary moment for the sake of what belongs to Jesus forever. And so when we're insulted, when we are wronged, when we are, those things, our expectation is not that civic system has the ability to produce anything other than, I guess we'll tell them they've been out of line as per what we have agreed to. There's no change expected in that process.
Well, there's definitely no transformation, is there?
Well, it's impossible to facilitate that.
Yeah, it's just like a reciprocal system rather than transformation or real kind of no one kind of grows that way, do they? No one like becomes more like Jesus. I don't think in that way. But I think when you read it and this would be my experience. I'm talking to people who perhaps you read the Sermon on the Mount and for a lot of your life you've gone, I don't know what that means, and I'm a bit scared of it, and I'm a bit unsure, and it seems like this almost like this impossible dream, like how do we do that? And I think there's actually quite a lot of practical wisdom in here, but I think it's also understanding that I read a commentator, I can't remember who, and he's like, Jesus is like sketching these ideas so that you then put yourself in that place and think, how would I respond in that situation? And if I'm in an equivalent situation, what is the invitation of Jesus or the Spirit to respond in that way? And I think rather than perhaps like, if literally somebody smacks you in the face, you turn the other cheek. There's a whole there's layers here that I didn't really understand until I've started to look at it again over the last few years and gone, because particularly that like turn the other cheek, it is in such common parlance. Look at I love that I got parlance in.
Nice.
And often it means, you're downtrodden, but let them continue to kind of tread on you or make you less than. And actually, what Jesus is saying is the opposite of that. He's saying that the kind of context of that is that a backhanded slap was this picture of dominance and humiliation. So if someone was going to slap you on the right cheek, it's because there was a power imbalance here. And they felt that they had the right in that society to smack you in the face, but you had no recourse. You couldn't go back to them. And, there was a power imbalance, often enslaved people or children or women. And so by turning the other cheek, bizarrely in that culture, to turn the other cheek meant that you were their equal. And so, I mean, this, but like, I found this just brilliant to understand it because I'd never really understood this before. And so when you turn the other cheek, what you're presenting in that moment is this courageous act of resistance, but it isn't in kind. It isn't with violence. It's saying, let me remind you, I am your equal. Let me remind you, I am made in God's image. And I think in a world that feels very polarized and disconnected, it reminds you, the aim, I think, of some of this is to remind people, no, we are the same. We might have different contexts and we might be in different stratas in society and we might have different access to resources, but we're all made in the image of God. And so when you turn the other cheek, what you're actually doing is going, you can choose what you want to choose in this moment, but I'm going to remind you with my courageous act of non-violent resistance that there's a better way, there's a different way. I won't respond in violence, and I understand that you are trying to shame me or use your power over me in a way that is unhealthy and unhelpful. I'm not going to respond in kind, and so I'm going to remind you that, the way of the kingdom is that we're all made in his image. And I just think it challenges like shame and inequality, and we live in a world where we still see that, where it might not be in that particular way that would have been experienced then, but just think about, the last time you felt like your dignity was taken away in some way or another, or the last time that you felt like you took somebody else's dignity away.
So
because that's the thing, isn't it? That we often identify with the one receiving the slap, but what if we're the one giving the slap?
Right. So this is. Let's talk to a little bit of that. In that,
because they would have both been in that crowd listening to Jesus,
of course,
yeah,
and reading the account subsequently,
yeah.
So let's. If you have only been taught and told to read scripture literally, you're going to find things like this really difficult because you're going to read things like this. Don't resist an evil person, and you're going to go, okay, that's given me a steer as to who I need to stay away from. But then you're going to read James chapter 4, and you're going to be told directly to resist the devil. And you're like, well, which is it? What do I do? So then we've got to be open to maybe understanding some of what you've just done, of like, okay, well, why those pictures? Why did Jesus use those examples? What's happening? It's happening for a time and a place, but it's also happening for all times and for all places. So what then does that mean? If it's less about the immediate logistics,
and the literal examples.
the literal
Yeah.
immediacy of that. I have, to this point, and let's hope that continues, never taken anybody's eye. And so,
I was going to say you can't say teeth because you got kids.
yeah. But we maybe then just reduce that to all the things that the Sermon on the Mount, when we don't really want to fully come under the authority of Jesus, can become of like, well, it's just a bit idealistic and a bit ridiculous and a bit far out and a bit like, and we don't really work like that anymore. And there are other parts of the world that maybe they need to study Matthew 5 a little bit more ardently than we do, and we have different ways of dealing with that, and yeah, but those different ways of dealing with that come from somewhere. Those different ways of dealing with that, all of this, I would argue, is an identity conversation.
Okay.
And what is up for debate here is for us to be confident or more confident about who we are and where we're from. Because the minute you start to fall into some question marks about, well, is only what happens in my 8 years on earth the only thing that matters? And like when we forget that we're dust, when we forget that this will not last forever, and listen, suffering and pain and injustice will do things to time that you can't comprehend. When you're in pain, you stub your little toe, time all of a sudden gets very long, and you're like, oh my goodness, this is going to go on forever and ever and ever. So it's not pretending that things are not experienced, but it is building a picture of our own identity that belongs to a place where if we have said yes to Jesus, then what I am submitted to forever is the way of Jesus. And what that means on earth is that there will be temporary moments where I'm going to bump up against people where their identity is not in Jesus. And so from their fear, from their confusion, from their lack of identity, because if Jesus is life, outside of that, there can only be nothing. And so for those formed with an identity of nothing, and that's not making them lesser, it's speaking to our response to them. So how do you turn the other cheek figuratively? How do you remind people like, no, you have no authority to treat me that way? Because to your point, not responding in the same way, the same force that you have been treated is not the same thing as passivity or silence to injustice. And
I think that's really important, because I think, again, this is sometimes how these words of Jesus get misappropriated, is that it's passivity, but it's not.
No.
It's not. It's just choosing to, and this is the thing of human beings, right, is we are learning how to choose how to respond. And it might take training and thinking and conversations like this and coming up against some of those people or places or situations and going, biscuits. I didn't quite respond in the ways of Jesus. That, okay, Jesus, what do you want to say to me about that? How do I invite your spirit to transform me in that? How do I learn from that? How do I continue to be a part of community in that? And I think the world that we live in often encourages you to either kind of be at a distance and sort of have an opinion about it, or your way is the way and everyone else kind of has to get out of the way. And I think Jesus is showing us a completely different thing, right? That it's not passive, but it's a response in his way. And I think that will take us a lifetime to keep saying yes to Jesus and keep figuring out when we're not like Jesus yet.
Yeah, agreed. And I wonder if in our, and we might talk about this in the second half of this episode, so I'll see where we end up here. But I wonder even if in our expectations of what is ours or due to us or what we deserve or what we should receive and all the things that we all do all the time, part of that dysfunction in our identity, part of that bump in the things that the Spirit of God is ironing out in us, is still the like, yeah, Jesus, I know, yeah, but like, let me get back on with the things that I want to get back on with. And so then we read these moments, these invitations to understand the character of God, the nature of God, and the ways of God as, but just tell us what the rules are, and so that we can I can just get back on with the thing that I was doing. Just tell me where the rules are, and then I'll know whether I'm inside or outside of those things. And what is compelling about Jesus is the invitational nature of the way of Jesus, to travel with God, to be aware of the presence of God, for everything to be included. That you can't separate and measure out your good works as a separate thing to the rest of your life. This is one of the unique factors of belonging to Jesus, being a Christian, in that we are not hedging our bets through good behavior, hoping to be weighed and found in favor at the end of time. We've talked about this a lot. The scale is tipped in your favor because of the grace and mercy of God. And so then our whole existence becomes a reflection of our relational interaction with the Spirit of God, rather than tell me the rules, tell me on what day I can do what, where, when, why, tell me what we wear, what we eat, where we go, tell me who I can talk to, who I can't talk to, tell me what happens when I step outside of those things. Tell me, Jesus is like, no, I need you to come so close that you're going to need to hear my voice, not abstracted through what the Bible is not, in my opinion, is a way for people to preserve a set of behaviors over distance, with this sort of nod and a wink to like, well, Jesus probably said something like, so if you could all just sort of quieten down and fit neatly into this prescribed way of being, that's not what that is. The story of God invites us to know God and invites us to know his character and his nature, so that when somebody does something to me that is not like God, I recognize it and I go, God's not like that. That doesn't feel like the way that God has responded to my brokenness, to my confusion, to my mistakes.
Because it is his character towards us, isn't it? It's what we are continually receiving from him towards us, but also towards people that we might not consider worthy of that or deserving of that, and neither are we.
Right.
Yeah.
And we exist in a, our society has pretty clear stipulations for how freedom is removed from people when they act outside of what is good, of what is the common good. If you were to steal Andy's car, there are consequences to that.
I really like it. I'm considering it.
It's a nice car.
It is.
So it's not like, again, I feel this can be misheard because part of what was misheard there and then and here and now is like, oh, you liberal Christians who just like would let everybody get away with everything. There is consequence. Sometimes evil exists in the world, and so like you're just blind and naive, and you'd let everybody get away with everything. Like, at what point has Jesus said that? That's not what Jesus has said at all. But I think that might be part of the conversation we're going to have in the second half. So
yes,
let's have a break.
Shall we?
Let's take a brain break, and then we'll be back in the second half to talk about the rest of it.
Nice. Let's go.
Cool.
See you in a bit. Welcome back after your brain break. Hope that your brain had a break, I guess.
Yikes.
Maybe I need another one after that. Anyway, so we are continuing the conversation around revenge. And the way of Jesus. Like, what does it look like to, Scott McKnight calls it, to not resist, but be ready for an act of grace. He's like, I think you could translate it not in a negative way, like do not resist, but in the positive action of be ready for an act of grace. So what does it look like to be a people who are ready to express an act of grace, to offer an act of grace, to choose that over revenge or escalating violence, even in this context, even under a system of oppression. So yeah, talk to us a little bit about vengeance. Why don't we choose revenge? Why, we've heard the words of Jesus and we want to be shaped by that. What is vengeance? Like, what does revenge do to us as a human?
Yeah. So it's getting your own back, isn't it? That.
So, yeah.
That.
Guys, if only you knew what I had to put up with on podcast record days, you would understand how this is speaking to my soul.
Andy and I like to give Sarah
such a hard time.
Practical application and learning opportunities to practice what we preach. But it's a little bit of that, right? It's a little bit of vengeance taps into those parts of me that are not like Jesus yet, and those parts of me are more open to believing lies about who I am, and then as a result what I deserve. And that breaks down usually, but not always, in a couple of ways. We have legitimate needs, and so some of those legitimate needs are to be in community, to be known and loved and included by other people, so that we are protected, so that we are cared for, so that we are seen and heard, and all of that is legit. What vengeance does is starts to tell you, if I don't take that by force for myself, that will never happen for me. And my needs will never be met. I will never be seen. I will never be validated. I'll never be included. I'll never be protected. I'll never be, that you start to believe the lie that you slip into non-existence, unless you can by force take the things that you feel. Or
you're not valued in the same way. Yeah, like your value, it is, you're right, that identity, that value, that significance, all the things that are necessary for human life,
which are legitimate, but they are legitimately met and found in Jesus.
Yeah.
And so what vengeance does is say, well, I know better than God does. And so I will falsely manage the timeline of me receiving what I should receive. The minute we start to forget what we should actually receive as a result of our behavior, as a result of our thought. And this is, again, part of what happens in other parts in Matthew chapter 5. Jesus introduces ideas that just feel ridiculous.
Well, he's not actually telling you to cut off your hand or gouge out your eye.
or to not think things. You know, it's like you can't control that. You can't. In pastoral ministry, we teach and tell people you might not be able to control the thought, but you control the action.
Yeah.
Well, that's not good enough for Jesus. Jesus is like, don't even think it. And you're like, how? I can't do that. But part of what is being put down there is like, what do you deserve?
Yeah.
And you're like, probably not the things that I think I deserve. Yeah. And this is not to condemn anybody. We're not miserable, horrible, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is what vengeance does is it, and so we talked, and we've got in our notes about the line vengeance is idolatry. And what I mean by that is the minute we start to contend for our own identity outside of Jesus, the minute we start to believe that we're in control of the timeline of how things should go, separate to what the Spirit is inviting us into. So it's not about passively sitting and doing nothing. It's not about, like you said in the first half, being a doormat or being naive. It's not about turning a blind eye to injustice or to oppression. It's about, do I know what the Spirit of God is inviting me into? Because if I do, then I should do that. Yeah. Because that's we are the people in possession. In a chapter on, as we're taught how to pray, the way that Jesus teaches us to pray is to ask for his will to be done. Yeah. And so all of these things, we are taking a step-by-step sort of run-up at this, but we are supposed to take all of these things together.
Yeah, it's the whole wider context of what this is.
Bringing all of these together.
Ways in which we learn different ways to live it out. Prayer is a massive one of them. We'll think about that more in the next episode, I think. But there are tools that Jesus gives us to help us. And the idea of, even your thinking, I think, is super helpful, because that's often what fuels our actions and reactions and responses. And so knowing that actually the Spirit of God is at work there as well to help us be aware of that, I think is really radical, to go, I don't have to feel, and we talk about this a lot, like pushed and pulled by everybody's agendas or the noise in the world or the systems around me. Like, I can be centered on Jesus. Like, my life can be grounded and rooted in a relationship with him at all times, so that when I'm tempted to reach for my own tools or my own way of being or a response that doesn't look like Jesus is there with me in that, and by his Spirit can help me in that. Yep.
Which is very different to learning a set of behaviors. Behaviors included in that, but that if learning the sets of behaviors were sufficient to bring transformation, it would have happened, and it didn't. And so then we've got to look at that and understand some of humanity was given every opportunity, multiple opportunities, to live according to a set of behaviors that would have allowed humanity to flourish and to take the shape of the one in whose image they are made. And at every opportunity, chose not to.
Yeah.
Every opportunity needed an external someone, something, somewhere to enter the story, to course correct it back to God.
Yeah.
And so instead of incrementally having another go at trying to get it right, God in his grace and mercy enters the story, God's self, and says, no. If there was a way of you being able to do this, you would have done it, but you haven't and you don't. There, evil exists in the world, and then what do we want to do about it? And so I think, again, if we read that the other way around, if the assumption is, what we're not saying is, if you as an individual behave like this, nothing bad will ever happen to you again. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is evil exists in the world.
Yeah.
And what Jesus says to do about it is to remind it where you're from, whose image you're made in, and then what vengeance does, and this is my last kind of thing on vengeance, what vengeance isn't is generous. And what Jesus is introducing to us in the "you have heard it said" conversation is, my people, God says, will be a generous people.
Yeah.
And we trace that right back. How will we recognize the people of God? Well, we'll recognize them through their generosity. They will be blessed to bless the nations.
Yeah.
They'll be blessed to bless others. We track that from day one,
Yeah.
right? What will be some of the characteristics of the people of God? They will be a generous people. And what vengeance does is it makes you tight, because you're trying to. The presumption is there isn't enough, and so you're going to take, and the best you can take from vengeance is the limit of what you lost. You never get any more back than what you lost. The law of retribution says you can only take up unto the equal value of what you've lost.
Yeah.
What the kingdom of God says is that you will receive way more than anything you perceive that you've lost or are capable of earning for yourself. You will be the beneficiary in ways that you can't control, that you didn't ask for, that you don't deserve, that are unimaginable.
Yeah.
But what that will look like is not the temporary limits of financial reward or status or power in a system that is broken.
And they're often the places that we want to see them, or perhaps we've even been conditioned to expect that that's how we see them, but to recognize that there is so much more going on with the words of Jesus here, right?
And so the invitation from Jesus to walk with him through these things is to be generous. And what vengeance tells us, the lie that vengeance kind of whispers to us, is you've got to take back by force what's been taken from you, because nobody else is going to protect you, nobody else is going to provide for you, nobody else is going to recognize your needs, your validity in existence. Nobody else is going to do that. And Jesus is like, well, who's told you that?
Yeah.
Who told you that?
Yeah.
I didn't tell you that. That's not true. But the way of Jesus looks radically different, and there is still something to kind of go back to where you started. There is still something in the way of Jesus that is radically out of sync with how the world outside of Jesus wants to live. That it's still confronting and confusing for people when the people of God choose not to enact vengeance. It's still odd when horrific things happen and the people of God choose to respond in generosity and kindness and love, and how would we communicate all that? Turn the other cheek.
Yeah.
To say, no, you have no right to treat me like that. But you have. And so what my response will be the way of Jesus in returning to you.
With all those examples as well.
Yeah.
Like if you want to go back and watch the communication, you can, because we kind of unpack like the slap and the shirt and the soldier. But that's what underlies all of them is no, like the way of Jesus is this generous response. This, I love that ready with an act of grace.
Yeah.
And that's so countercultural that you have to know that the source of that is found in God, because you can't manufacture that, and you can't you can grow in that, and you can understand that the more you get to know who God is, and the more you work with the Spirit, allow the Spirit, invite the Spirit to shape who you're becoming. But that doesn't just sort of happen by osmosis. I don't think. I think there is an element of God does what only God can do to shape us and change us and transform us. But in these examples, you have to be a willing participant in the way of Jesus, because it won't feel natural to respond in the way of Jesus necessarily.
No.
Particularly when you're starting out, like it will feel, as you learn to drive, it feels a bit clunky because the gears, you're really aware. Hopefully, the longer you walk well with Jesus, the more you become like him, and this becomes much more of your response. But none of us ever get it right. Like none of us ever, we haven't arrived, anyone. And so it is this continual, I think, invitation to keep coming back and going, oh, Lord, where have I maybe responded, even if it isn't an outward response? These are very outward responses. Like you would see someone slap and you would see a shirt and you would, you would see a soldier, all of that. But I think a lot of this stuff starts in our internal world, doesn't it? In our, the biblical language is heart. And so to be aware of that in yourself and to be talking to Jesus about that and in community with others, working that out together, where we offer grace to each other when we don't get it right, and we offer grace to one another when we feel wronged, slighted, when we feel like our dignity or we've received an injustice. It can then become a way of being, I think, rather than just do this one thing.
The big picture, if we are open to engaging with the big picture from these words, I think a version of what Jesus is saying here, included in all of the things we've just talked about for 45 minutes, but I think the big picture here, and then we're going to talk about practically what some of the things we could do about this. Death only has the ability to reproduce death.
Yeah.
Life will produce flourishing. And these are garden pictures. We know this story.
Yeah, we need to walk well in the garden, friends of God. Yeah.
We know the story. And so death can only repay up and equal to death. And so nothingness. So if you trade with nothing, you get nothing. But if you trade with life, you get trees and fruit and life and ecosystems and community. And again, these are the big picture that's
this is the compelling why, isn't it? Why we do this. It's not so that we are good people, although hopefully you become a better person this way, but it's because this is what helps extend and express the life of God.
It's where life is. And so what that looks like is, you've heard it said, treat people the way they're going to treat you. I tell you, you're going to do way more than that. You can be way bigger than that. You can be way better than that, because your validation, your identity, your provision, your protection isn't going to come peer to peer. It's going to come from your Father in heaven, who sees you and knows you. And with, again, Jesus or Matthew is setting you up for that here, because what's he about to tell you in Matthew 6? He's about to tell you about lilies that don't look after themselves. He's about to tell you about birds that don't have a mortgage. He's about to tell you about all the other things. So you come into that primed with this. You come into Matthew 6 primed by Matthew 5, going, okay, well, if I'm not to fight with people about how my needs are met, how are my needs met? And he's like, I've got great news to tell you.
Such good news! Which is why it's not good advice, like N.T. Wright said, and it's actually good news. Because this is, and if you're ever, like, I often find this really helpful for me, so this might be helpful practice in some of the how. Like, how do you do this? I will take time to think, read, listen to the Bible, just about the responses of Jesus, like the way of Jesus, like literally track it through and go, oh, actually, Jesus could have taken revenge if he wanted to and chose not to. And so I just remind myself that this is the character of Jesus, and that this is who I want to become like. And like, this is the intention of my heart and the direction of my choices. And that when it becomes difficult and painful, I can also take that to Jesus. Oh, I didn't quite get it right in that particular situation. And it can sometimes feel really big and out there, because the likelihood is, for lots of people, you're not going to have someone slap you across the face. I mean,
Hopefully
you might. You're not going to have someone who wants to like sue you for your shirt, or a soldier to get you to carry their bag. But the principles underneath that, I find really helpful to go, oh, so when was either the last time I felt like I took dignity away from somebody, and what do I want to do about that? Because that isn't the way of Jesus. Or when was the last time I felt like that happened to me, and how do I want to respond to somebody who has made me feel smaller than myself? And like, you, even as I say that, so this is some of the practicalities of how, like, because if we're not aware of what it means and how that can look in our lives, we might miss those moments to invite the Spirit to shape us and change us. We might need to offer forgiveness. We might need to ask for forgiveness. Like, there might be some things that we need to do in response to it. But I find you often say people are not the problem, but they can be feedback loops to us. And so if you found yourself recently, feeling like someone has made you smaller, someone has taken away some of your agency or your choice, or has made you feel less than. We are in a world where online there is a lot of what's called othering and them and us. If you felt that way, that you've been made they're them and you're us or whatever, that is usually a place to go, oh, so help me here, Jesus. Like, help me think about how I want to respond in this way, and it starts in our kind of internal world, in our kind of inner being with God, really.
Yeah. I think.
Go on. What other practical wisdom you got? How do we do it? Like, how do we do it?
So you're gonna have to overdevelop your awareness of your identity in Jesus, which is work, and so what does that look like in your rhythm of life? In that, I think it's not nice when bad things happen to you. Like, this is not, again, this is not the remedy for nothing bad ever happening to anybody. That's not what we are communicating this as. But
this is a way of walking well in the midst of it.
Well, it's going to give you better tools to recognize why you feel so angry all the time.
Yeah.
It's going to give you better tools to why you think you're the only one add whatever the thing is here. It's going to give you a better context for why you find certain types of people really hard work. It's going to give you an openness to, it puts you, let's find a really hacky way to communicate this. It's going to give you a letterbox in your front door so that you're now capable of receiving the invitation from the Spirit.
Really good.
Whereas I think what vengeance does, it gives you bricks to just I'm going to use one to block up the window and the other one to throw at your head. Whereas I think what this does as a teaching, as an idea, the Spirit of God showing us his nature and his character goes, I might need to be open here. I might need to be open to receiving something here, which feels a little bit vulnerable. It feels a little bit unsafe. Feels a little bit like, if I let the baddies in, they're going to take all my stuff. And it's like, if you let the Spirit of God in, you'll have life in its fullest and most abundant form. Yeah. And now you get to live in a world without front doors and without that picture of Revelation 21, which I know it's boring that I bang on about these references a lot, but like that is a picture of the eternal promise of living in a city without boundary edges, where God is presenced with his people. He's not administrated to a building or to a place or to a set of behaviors, but we are consciously, eternally aware of the presence of God without limits, and we get to live like that now. We get to be invited into that now. So where do you feel your boundary edges? Not healthy boundaries. Where do you feel your boundary edges where you're like, I could never have that conversation. I could never speak to that person. That
pushes my buttons.
They have wronged me in a way I will never be able to deal with that person. Now, you might never be in the same physical space as that person again. It might be appropriate to never share space with that person again. It might be appropriate to remove that person from your existence. But in your internal world, it's not plotting a course for their misery, for their downfall. They will get what's theirs. I will make sure nobody ever speaks to them. Whatever. It gets, caricature at that point. But am I open to receiving an invitation from the Spirit of God to say, no, my identity doesn't come from, and this is so hard when you have to do this in real life.
And in the moment, which is why there's so much grace.
Yeah, of well, where am I? So then what we're looking for, pastorally, the tools that we're looking for, what helps me hear that story? What helps me, what gives me the gift of faith to believe that by faith in Jesus, my condition has changed, my identity has changed? What gives me, what helps me to walk well in loving Jesus and choosing the betterment of others for the glory of God? What can I do to help me do that? What does my day look like? Start with your day. How am I set up to encounter my identity in Jesus today, even if I know I've got people, places, and things that are going to push my buttons or going to help me not believe that to be true? What what control do I have over those pieces? And listen, I'm not coming for people's habits here, and we're all human, and we all have the full range of human experience. But it might be in the advert break between the program that you're watching, instead of fast forwarding through that or whatever it might be like, oh, I've now got 3 minutes to be open to the invitation of the Spirit of God to maybe look at, how did Jesus respond when people did awful, horrific things to God, or to pray, or to maybe just put everything to one side for 30 seconds and be still and just check in with yourself and go, why have I been angry all day? Like, what is that? Where's that come from? Like, I don't want to choose to be that. Or, no, I do want to be angry. Why? Why do you want to be angry? What is fueling that? Can you get to where that is coming from? And then what's the best path to, you're going to need to talk to somebody.
Yeah.
So who's
Definitely
the safest person to talk to about it?
You need community to work this stuff through with someone who loves you and loves Jesus, because you need a safe space to be honest with yourself, with God, and with safe people to go, hey, I really struggle in this, or this feels like a real challenge for me. And it might feel like the big picture of, gosh, if I was in any of those situations, I probably would have punched them back, or I would have gone back to sue them in the court, and all of those things. And I think it's really, I want to be clear, like, there's not shame or guilt or condemnation, but there is an invitation to keep coming back to the ways of Jesus, the words of Jesus. And I think if the big things feel too big, then start with those small steps. There's a Jewish theologian who has written on the Sermon on the Mount, and he talks about small steps, like recognizing, like, Jesus was a realist and understood, so it's not that it's idealistic and unable. He understood the world that he was part of, and he chose to operate in a way that he didn't choose revenge. And so if Jesus initiates and establishes a new way for humanity, then it's possible for us, with the help of the Spirit and each other, to do that. And so he talks a little bit about, like, just choose a step. And he has 3 things. So one of the things he talks about is choose a step away from conflict and toward empathy. And I think that's a really, for me, I just stayed there, and I was like, oh, I can be aggressive and violent with my words. I can be aggressive or violent with my opinions or my internal judgments, like what I actually think about people. No one else may know that, but Jesus knows that. And I can be a violent in my response to those things, whether that's ever expressed externally and anyone else ever hears about that, but you know it in your internal world, and so does Jesus. So what would it look like that in a moment where I reach for conflict or violence or aggression, that I try to understand the other person. I try to put myself in their shoes. I ask the Spirit of God, help me to feel what they feel. Because Jesus goes on to talk about the golden rule in Matthew 7, that you would do to others as you'd have done to yourself. And I think there's something about that he's seeding in these conversations. Because if I was the person on the other side of that, I would want to receive someone's grace or forgiveness or understanding. And so I can be responsible if I am reacting or responding in a violent or conflicting way. And one of the ways you can do then is toward empathy. So that doesn't mean that you suddenly become, you're singing Kumbaya and everything's lovely and rosy, but I am moving a step away from this maybe default thinking or this path or a groove that I've got into, or a way that feels, why it's easier. Often it's the easier thing, isn't it? It's just to let myself feel that. In the long run, it's not, but in the moment it is. And then, okay, so how could I just move one step toward empathy? Like I might still not be able to think I could have a conversation with that person or understand where they're coming from, but what would it look like to just think about them as a human being made in the image of God as well? And start moving towards that. And so I found that really practically helpful in that reviewing. But it is you've got to take that responsibility. No one can do that for you. There'll be lots of people who can do that with you and the Spirit of God within you. But it's your decision as a follower of Jesus. Like, how much do I want to grow in this? And we won't, like I said, we won't always get it right. But to keep coming back and going, okay, I want to be someone who lives ready with an act of grace. I want to live in that way. It's good for my soul. It is good for the kingdom, and it's the way that Jesus lives. And so that might look like just being aware of when I've been violent in my reaction or response, whether externally or internally, and moving just a step towards empathy. What is it like to be in their shoes? What is it like to feel like they feel? And to consider the other person, to consider one another, which again comes back to what you were saying about vengeance feeling like idolatry, is I'm considering them in my response.
There is, and then with this we need to pray and move on. There is a level of honesty in our self-awareness that's required to live like Jesus. And that what vengeance does is externalizes, it makes it everybody else's fault.
Yeah, that's really helpful.
And the way of Jesus is honest about, oh no, that I might be the problem. Then there is work required in me.
Or I have a part to play in that.
I've contributed in some way, shape or form. And the way of vengeance, the lie of vengeance, is that we can deal externally with an internal problem. And so vengeance is always pushing out, and the way of Jesus, the generosity of Jesus, is consistent with his character and his nature. Of the presence of God is inexhaustible, and so the generosity of God is without limit and without end. That was true at the beginning, before there was anything. And that is the promise of the end of all things, that his presence will be without limit, without end. That's true of his provision. And so, again, what that looks like in the real world for us, in the environments that we're in, do I feel like I'm trying to fix an internal problem externally?
That's good.
By limiting somebody else? Or am I looking for my internal condition to encounter the boundaryless goodness of God that might look like a change of opinion or a change of approach or a change of all the helpful things that you said, use of language, driving style, purchasing habits, all of those things, and for who, and for why. It's the identity piece that we're going to need each other to help each other with, but in the day to day, am I trying to fix an internal tension through externally limiting somebody else? And if I am, good news, there's a bunch of stuff you can do about it. You can choose not to. That is the lie of our desire for control, that the world would be fine if I was in charge. And if I could limit who does what, when and where, everything would be better. That also, if that is you, again, this is quite specific, but if that is you, you might need to speak to somebody about anxiety in your life, and what that looks like and how that kind of shows itself in your thoughts and in how you are interacting with other people. In that, you might be disconnecting yourself.
There might be some fear underlying some of that. Yeah.
There might not. It's a little bit outside the boundaries of what is perhaps helpful to put on the internet. But if you're like, oh yeah, why does it only go right when I'm in charge? You're not. Jesus is. And so keep minding that thought. Yeah.
It's great. Okay, well, let me pray. It's one of the things we do on Around the Fire. We like to finish with just a moment of prayer and reflection. And so I wonder if you are able, and it's safe for you to do so, and you wanted to do something, maybe just to open your hands as a sign of just receiving from God and being open-handed to what God wants to remind you of, encourage you with, shape you by. And then that open-handedness that says, also, I want to be willing to give away. I want to be willing to offer this. And I just I'm thinking about this picture, this phrase, ready for an act of grace. So I wonder if in your external kind of posture of holding your hands open, you're saying to the Spirit of God, God, I'm ready to receive more of your grace. Like, I'm ready for an act of grace from you. And I see that in Jesus, in his life, in his death, in his resurrection. And I receive that grace, God. Remind me of that grace today. And then, Lord, I want to be a reflection of that grace to others. With what you've given to me, with what I have received and am receiving of your grace and your mercy, God, would you give me courage and kindness to offer that to others? Lord, would you show me practically how I can move away from conflict and toward empathy? for your glory, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much for being with us again. Please get in touch, podcast@elimlifechurch.co.uk, and we are going to have the second half of this conversation
Yes.
in the next
Oh, it's
episode.
going to get deeper.
So, take a deep breath, and we will see you for the next one. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.